Most BDRs are in seat for call it like a year, 2, maybe 3 years at a time. And most of them don't have any tactical experience. So a lot of what you're looking for is very intangibles. What do the high performing BDRs have? And first and foremost, it's grit, it's curiosity, it's general mental ability, and conscientiousness.
This is Revenue Makers, the podcast by 6 Sense, investigating successful revenue strategies that pushed companies ahead.
Sima, it's either a hell yes or hell no.
I would apply that to many things in life, actually most things in life. But what are you talking about, Adam?
Well, our guest today, awesome guest. I always say that, but he is awesome.
He's a star.
He really is. And we get to work with him every day here at 6 Sense. He's one of our BDR leaders, but has an amazing backstory, personal story about how he became who he is today into this role. And secondly, just some really, really amazingly strong, but really actionable insights on how do you build a BDR team, starting from the profile of the right leader down to recruiting to your individual reps. So just a great conversation, like how to go do that. And we talked about our favorite word, AI.
We did. The guest today is Ernest Owusu. He's a star, like we mentioned, and he's been doing this for a while. And we've done a couple of episodes on BDRs, to your point, and we talked about how outbound is dead and whatnot. But this is really about setting your team up in the right way, attracting and really weeding through the right candidates to build the right team, things to look for, even specific questions to ask. So to your point, it's a really tangible takeaways in this specific episode. And he's just, great to talk to. And I will say, I'll maybe put in a little teaser for the end of the episode. Ernest probably wins on the best story of the most ridiculous thing he's been asked to do.
Yeah. And I always say, we need a photo of what he talks about, but I'm sure he'll never share that. Anyway.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Ernest, you're here. We were looking forward to this, but we are very lucky because we work with you every day. So now we're going to share, we say share you with the world, but you're out there more than we are probably. And everyone sort of, you've got the...
Well, I feel lucky as well. So we're feeling the same way.
Thank you. Your celebrity status.
We love working with you. We get to see firsthand the magic you create with the BDR teams and how you're really such an evangelizer of it outside of 6 Sense. The BDR program here, let's be honest, like you really helped build up from scratch. And so we want to share what you did with the world. But why don't you first tell us a bit about yourself, Ernest?
Yeah, sure. So first off, thanks so much for having me. But again, my name is Ernest. I guess my background is before getting to tech in this amazing B2B go-to-market world, I was actually a professional athlete. So I played for the Minnesota Vikings and Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a number of years. And it was a great experience, probably a lot more stressful than being in tech, I'll say. But I loved it. And I got hurt like most athletes do. And when I was trying to figure out my next step, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I just took a leap of faith and jumped into a career in sales. And I started as an SDR, loved it, became an account executive. And then after that, I had that need to lead, coach, mentor people. So I was asked to be a BDR leader, and I basically made a career out of it. And that's kind of what led me up to 6 Sense.
It makes perfect sense to me, actually, that you would go from professional athlete. We're going to dig into building a BDR team, leadership, and all that. And it works so well, and it makes so much sense to me.
The reason why I did choose this path, because as you can imagine, getting to that elite level, it was very hard. And I was trying to figure out what I could do that could kind of allow me to still be just as successful in many different ways. So I took a hard look at myself to figure out what it took me to get there. And lo and behold, a career in sales was exactly what would help me get to that next path. And that's why I jumped in. And a lot of the things I learned here at 6 Sense, as well as at other companies in the past and succeeded with, were because of what I did as an athlete. So that's what I took onto the teams and helped build from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies around how, I guess, the discipline and the rigor that, having a career in athletics, not even at your level, Ernest. I mean, not many of us have been in the NFL, right? But just, I think having that overall discipline of being in sports, being on a team, having to win as a team, like it really plays into a fantastic hiring profile, both as a player, but also as a coach in the corporate world.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we're going to talk later on about building teams with leaders as well as SDRs, but specifically there are studies on like not just athletes in general, but even like single sport athletes where you're on a team, like how do they perform in certain environments? And there's a lot of information that you can use to help build and scale SDR teams. And I did that over here at 6 Sense. So excited to share what I can on that.
Yeah, I'm not very athletic, so I'm feeling a little bit like I don't have any of those things. Maybe I'll pick up a sport.
I will say pickleball is an opportunity. A lot of people are playing pickleball nowadays.
So that's very true. Let's dig into the first kind of big area, right? Let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about, because obviously you yourself have hired BDR leaders. I'm sure you've made some amazing hires and probably along the way been like, oops, maybe not. But if you were to start there and say first, like, what are the characteristics of a great BDR leader? And then we can kind of like get into like, how do you find these people? But, maybe start there.
It's really challenging hiring the right BDR leader. I'd say for your organization, first and foremost, really understand where you're at and what you need, because there are very different skill sets and different leaders that you're going to have to tap into. If I had to kind of categorize it into 3 buckets, you have to assess, are you an organization that needs an innovator, a manager? So basically know more or less of what you're looking for. And for me, when I first started out here at 6 Sense, we had to hire that first leader, who actually still here today, Ben, a phenomenal leader that we have on the organization. We were still building, so we need an innovator, right? So we need someone to come on board and like build new different best practices that we could develop and make sure that we're scaling our team that way. And again, being focused on what you need, and obviously some certain things to think about with your profile and how you're asking questions are important, but you got to really know where you're at first and foremost.
I think running a BDR org, it's just so unique because of the amount of, you're holding them, really, you're bringing people on board with the goal of moving them up into different careers. And so there's just so much more hiring happening consistently as a leader. And there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of attrition. It's just by nature of the role. And so how do you manage that and get ahead of that, particularly when you still have quota you need to fill and carry, and you still have goals you need to hit?
And going back again to the hiring profile of a good leader, your ability to hire BDRs should be the number one skill set. When I think about building and scaling SDR teams, first and foremost, can you hire and can you onboard? If you can do those 2 things really well, they can build teams that operate very efficiently. But specifically with BDRs, it's really hard because your point, like most BDRs are in seat for call it like a year, 2, maybe 3 years at a time. And you almost have the expectation they're not going to be there. And not to mention, most of them don't have any tactical experience. So a lot of what you're looking for is very the intangibles. Again, going back to what it's like to be an athlete. And for us, actually, interesting enough, I actually have the book right here. There's this book called Leading Sales Development. It's the go-to book that I use to hire and build profiles. And the specific thing they did was they actually they did a research study with Salesforce, SalesLoft, I think a company called AlphaSense. And they were able to determine of those intangible skill sets, what do the high-performing BDRs have? And first and foremost, it's grit, it's curiosity, it's general mental ability, and conscientiousness. And then if I could get specific as to like what those 4 things are and how to assess them, grit is essentially, it's having a long-term goal and being passionate about it despite plateaus and successes, right? So, and think about the BDR role where it's a very monotonous job. You're doing the same thing over and over again, but you want to make more money. You want to be that AE, whatever it may be, and you can kind of go through those things, right? So being able to assess that is really important. And also I will say too, hiring an individual who does not have grit, really tough to train someone to be in place to be effective based upon that. So the first one is grit. The second one is general mental ability. And with general mental ability, think of that as like clock speed, if you want to call it. But especially right now in this whole day and age of like AI and how much more difficult the role is getting, can you hire someone who does not necessarily need a script and they can think on the cuff, they can think on the fly and find ways to prospect? That's a very challenging thing to train someone to do to be effective in the role. The third one is curiosity, which some things we've done over here that have been effective is like, has this person read any books on prospecting? Have they followed any influencers on LinkedIn? Are they looking for like different ways to improve their craft, right? If you can find someone who's naturally curious, yes, leaders should be enabling their teams, but that person is going to enable themselves over and over again without your help, right? So it's kind of like one of those multiplier effects to make sure that they're that much more effective. And then the last one of the 4 is conscientiousness. And that comes down to, think of that as like a competitiveness of not just their team, but also with yourself. Are they always looking for ways to make themselves better every single day? Are they detail oriented? Are they thoughtful with every single thing they're doing? I've noticed consistently that those 4 core traits are the intangibles that make great BDRs, but also it actually flows up into BDR leaders as well, because a lot of teams don't necessarily realize that BDR leaders are essentially, they are individual BDRs at scale, because good BDR leaders are always trying to find ways to pass opportunities and pass data insights to their teams. They have to have those skill sets, even though they're actually leading the teams on their own. Yeah.
Now, given they are all intangibles, one of the things that I think I've said this in another episode too, I'm always it feels like a contradiction where you're hiring people that are, in a lot of cases, the first experience that someone's going to have with a brand. They are driving what could be millions and millions of dollars in pipeline and business, but ultimately will probably be some of the most junior people in the company at a pretty much an entry-level salary.
Yep.
There's that sort of contradiction. But when you're talking about the intangibles, how do you screen for that? How do you actually create interview questions and create scenarios to say, like, this person's showing grit, this person's got curiosity? Like, that's got to be really challenging.
It really is. And the one thing I will say, and this goes with hiring in general, the mantra I've always had here is if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no, right? So like, even if like you feel like you've got the answer, but it's not an amazing answer or you don't feel really good about it, then unfortunately it's not enough to move the person forward. So specifically with those main 4 core traits, when you think about grit, one thing we like to ask is like, talk me through a time where, and it could be from personal life, from school, from work, it doesn't really matter, but talk me through a time where you were trying to achieve something and you failed. What caused the failure, what happened, what was the end result. And we don't really care about the failure. We care about more or less of like, what was their thought process? How are they trying to bounce back? Do they keep pursuing the goal, right? That's a very easy, tentative way to assess that grit. Again, with curiosity, like very easy to assess, like, have you read a book on sales development? Have you read a podcast? Have you watched any interviews on YouTube? And the ones who have done this not only can cite it, but they give you like very specific examples of what they learned about those ones are naturally curious. And it's exciting because when they actually do come and see, they're going to do the exact same thing once they're in the role, which is phenomenal. If I had to think through general mental ability, and again, this is one that you can be very careful about when it comes to hiring BDR teams because it's a very hard skill to teach. It can be taught, but in terms of how much time it takes to get someone to learn that, in terms of the production you need, you got to be very careful about that. But what I've always seen a lot of teams do, and we've done this here in the past, is get them some kind of writing assignment. And it's really important if you do a writing assignment to ask them questions on it because lo and behold, some people do get help. So like, let's just call it. We'll call
No way. Come on.
Yeah, they do get help with the questions. So with the prompt. So it's more so asking them questions on like, what does our company do? What does the persona do? Why should they buy our product? They don't have to be experts on your product or personas, but can they connect the dots in a conversation is really important. And then a weird one is with the conscientiousness is we always ask people like, how do you stay organized? Like, do you use Excel sheets? You take notes, things along those lines, because typically people that are very intentional and thoughtful for the things they do have a very robust system for staying organized. It's a very clear sign they're going to do in the role. So in terms of BDRs, those are the clear ways to do that. Now, when I was talking about leaders, so again, the main profiles are builders, managers, and innovators. It depends on where your company's at. The biggest distinction I've noticed to kind of set yourself apart to determine what you actually need is like, can you identify as a person a right brain thinker or a left brain thinker? The challenging part about being a BDR leader is you actually have to be both. And what I mean by that is like, you have to be that person who like is creative and innovating and seems super excited, but you also have to be an exceptional operator, or also whether or not you're a manager or you're a VP. That is really hard to assess. What I've always noticed is like creating a scenario of a company that's in a gap. And like, it could be from hiring, it could be from motivation, it could be from the KPIs that they're set in place of the team, and just ask them questions on how they solve it. Typically, going back to like the BDR profile, their level of curiosity towards those different components will be the clear determinant as to whether or not they are that right brain or left brain thinker and the one that you need for your organization.
Yeah. I love, that if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. Let's talk about making the team successful. I'd love your POV on whether BDRs should sit in marketing or sales. Because there's that age-old question of how will they be promoted if they sit in marketing? But then on the flip side, you want the BDRs to be telling the same story that marketing is telling the market. And so wonder if you've got a strong POV either way.
So unfortunately, my POV is not going to be what you want. I think it depends, right? So there are many organizations where if the majority of your pipeline is generated through marketing activity, through in-market accounts, through inbounds, then you better be in the marketing because that alignment needs to be strong. Now, on the flip side, if it's like very small TAM, like large enterprise strategic accounts where it's hard to break into at times, it probably makes more sense to be associated with the sales team. On the flip side, again, I've seen those like massive organizations with hundreds of SDRs that actually roll into operations. So it is hard to say where exactly it should land. I've always thought that it's contingent upon your situation, but the most important thing is it's on the leader. every leader has to know what your gap is based upon whether or not you're in sales, marketing, or operations, or even finance. I've been in finance before, and account for that to make sure your team's getting the support they need. And I think, Simon, to your point, like I've seen examples where some SDR leaders have really struggled to get their teams promoted because they're not in marketing. From my perspective, that's on them, right? Like, are you building relationships with the AEs or the sales leaders? Are you making sure they're getting enabled to move forward? And if you're not doing that, then yes, it is going to happen where it might be more challenging. But again, there's no sweet spot. It depends on what your company needs at the time. And honestly, you could pivot in a couple of years or so as your company grows, but it's on the leader to make sure the team's getting the support they need.
Yeah, makes sense. So we're talking about being successful. I think the BDR function is rapidly changing, and we have our favorite buzzword AI to certainly thank for at least part of that. And Simon had an interesting statistic that we just received about teams that are using AI in outbound. It was 55%. But the really interesting thing was that only 7% were actually or using that as a catalyst to reduce headcount. So here's data that says that it's not coming for people's jobs. It's helping to augment or helping to make them more effective. So from your perspective, and you've been in it right here at Sixth Sense about how AI is working with BDRs, augmenting BDRs, enhancing BDRs. Like, what do you think? Where are we headed? Where are you seeing the good, the bad, the ugly?
I'm surprised that 55% number isn't a bit higher. There are so many opportunities and applications in the SDR role to apply AI. And frankly, the ones who would sit at 45% are missing out right now. So that number should be higher. It's also interesting to hear that we're only at 7% thinking about reducing headcount. Now, I'm not saying that the role will completely go away with AI, but like I am very confident, and we're seeing over here at Sixth Sense as well as in the industry, that like you actually can do more with high quality with AI. So maybe that 7% is an indication that companies are growing. They're not looking to reduce headcount, but again, like I'm seeing it time and time again. There are some things I will say that like that human, that creative, that relationship building aspect that we're not quite there yet with AI. And I don't know how and when they'll be impacted. So maybe that's intact, but I just don't see how there won't be an environment where teams are smaller because of how much more efficient they are with AI. And I feel like I'm already seeing it. Again, not to say that the role will be completely eliminated. It just means that you'd be a lot better at your job than you were in the past.
We were very early adopters of AI. I mean, we're Sixth Sense. We're a company that was built on AI, and we launched our own generative AI product 3 years ago. And it really has been about augmenting. So firstly, of course, just the technology to work on accounts that are in market, right? But then what do you say to them? How do you say it to them? And we've taken some of those repeatable tasks off of the plate of the BDR, things like webinar follow-up, email follow-up. And we've pointed our BDRs to more higher value add activities like picking up the phone and actually, calling the prospect, doing connections on LinkedIn, hyper-personalizing. Like, talk to us about how you have worked with the team to really integrate AI into their workflows.
A lot of the metrics in the past of like the 80-20 rule where you have to personalize 20% and automate the rest because you don't have time, those things should be going away. And we're seeing it over here as well. And we're working towards a world where basically everything that the team does is very high touch, right? It's like you have the time and resources to like do a lot of personalization and research on that one account, that one contact, and make a killer cold call and get a meeting that way, right? Or you have the ability to do a lot of personalization on the email or social selling to try and find engagement with them. So that's the MO of what we're following right now, is trying to create an environment where the volume of quality activity increases across the board, and anything else that can be automated that's still effective and producing pipeline, the BDRs just don't have to worry about it. And we're still bringing it to fold so we can create pipeline from the team. But having them focus more on like the high touch, the relationship building, hyper focused personalization that, again, maybe AI one day will be able to do, but we're not quite there yet.
That was going to be my question, talking about the personalization factor. But is there anything that you've seen that you would say, okay, like the next step, we've got hyper personalization, that's the next step. But what else? What could be the next evolution if you were to put on your fortune teller hat for a second? If you could create anything, I guess would be the better question.
Yeah, so I think email through personalization, like that just keeps getting better and better through time. I can imagine a world where BDR is just like don't need to email at all, right? Because it's so good with AI. The thing I'm curious about is through social selling or through the phone or even through trade shows, if AI will have the ability to replicate some of the relationship selling that can be effective at times. I haven't quite seen it yet, at least through social and through the phone. There are some things with the phone that are popping up recently. I've seen that have been effective, but not quite something yet email is killer right now. You can have some great emails that go out to you. You have no idea what's on SDR, which is pretty cool. But through the phone and through social, I'm not quite seeing it yet, but I do imagine in time that it'll start creeping into that and the whole entire prospect landscape will be impacted with AI.
Yeah. Any other interesting trends or topics that you're seeing out there, particularly around just making the teams more effective? And it could be tech and it could be completely non-tech related too. Like what have you just found really works well?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to the whole thing with AI, again, with recruiting. So right now, it's definitely a bit of an employer's market. There are a lot of candidates out there in the market. It's hard for individuals to find roles. But as this thing keeps developing, what we're going to be expecting from candidates and the profile we're going to be looking for is just going to get higher and higher through time. And not say right now, but in the past, you could make bets on individuals who had all those intangible qualities, but like maybe you weren't quite sure in them. I do imagine that because AI is getting so good, more is going to be expected from our reps in due time that like the profile and the expertise and even potentially like their domain experience before they enter the role is going to be a lot higher than it is right now. And that's not saying that individuals like myself who made a career transition or individuals that are coming straight out of college won't be able to find that next SDR role. But I do see a world where like someone who, say, for example, has been in the auto industry and they have relationships, they know the industry like the back of their hand, like maybe they're the next wave of SDRs that we have because they just know us so well. But I guess in short, like as we're building teams, I would just encourage everyone to think about the long-term impact of hiring people that really know the industry and are domain experts if you can, because AI is getting so much stronger and that expertise might be needed in the future.
Yeah. To that point, actually, we've talked a lot about what employers look for and what employers and leaders do. Let's put it in kind of the POV of the actual candidates. Are there things that you recommend they do? Certifications? I mean, I know you've done a certification for 6 Sense. Like what would put them above maybe another candidate?
Yeah, any kind of skill improvement or skill development you can do ahead of time and through certifications like we have our own through 6 Sense. There's some amazing books out there like Fanatical Prospecting. We used to require everyone to read it when they first came on board because it's a really good book just around the mental side as well as tactics of prospecting. But anything you can do to like demonstrate some kind of expertise, even if you haven't done the role, it gives the manager a lot more confidence in the fact that they can hire you. And I also will say this extends to all roles out there. Treat your interview like a BDR role, like multi-identity the account, find the main decision maker, reach out to them proactively on your own. Right now, a lot of us are hounded in the inbound channel of people just doing applying mass applies online, and the ones that are sticking out are the ones who are essentially operating as BDRs. And the same thing for leaders as well. Like I've seen a lot of leaders that kind of put their BDR hat back on and use that as a way to prospect and find opportunities. So that's a good way to stand out. But I'd say to the point I made earlier, fanatical prospecting, there's some great resources and guides out there on just how to write emails. I know the guys from 30 Minutes to Presence Club put out an awesome book recently that's phenomenal on cold calling. So anything you can do to kind of give some more confidence to a leader that you know the job before you do it, I highly encourage that.
So we have a question that we ask every one of our guests, which is what is the most ridiculous thing you've been asked to do in your career? And it could be any one of your careers, either good or bad, just bearing in mind that the boss is on the call right now on our recording now. So if any of the ridiculousness came, you might want to avoid that. But we've gotten some pretty wild answers from smuggling to all sorts of different things.
I'll talk through one from the NFL. One is one from being in tech. It's technically ridiculous, but so we had this tradition when I was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where I think it was every other Thursday we sat together as a D line and we had dinner together. But as you can imagine, like there were multi millionaires in that dinner. We played card roulette, and we always made a point to rack up the bill as high as we possibly could. And myself, I was a rookie at times, so I was not making $40 million. We got a $20,000 bill. So every other person on the team who had like a 30, 20, $40 million contract, they were the first people out of the bet, right? And it was myself as well as someone else who was like a journeyman. So basically someone who doesn't typically land on teams very often with a $20,000 bill. And my card was in there. I was just praying that I was not going to pay. And fortunately, I did have to pay it. But it's just tough because in professional athletics, there's weird things that have like that where it's like, throw your money out there and waste it and just do like reckless things. And it's kind of like the culture you have to do it. And fortunately, in that one instance, I almost lost, but I did not. So that was in football. In tech, and then, again, this goes back to, I was talking about different leaders and the kind of profile to look for. I had a team that was not hitting their number. I need to motivate them for the rest of the quarter. And I made a bet with them that if they hit their number, I would dress up in a costume and prance around downtown San Francisco. I technically won the bet because I'm a team perform. And I went to a costume store, got a cat costume, and spent an hour just running around San Francisco.
Stop it. Are there pictures out there of that?
So, there's a picture somewhere. I gotta find it, but there's some evidence out there.
So actually that question is the most ridiculous thing you asked yourself to do, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, for those who don't know, I'm 6'5", so it's like really weird to see a 6'5" cat just like running around San Francisco.
You win.
You absolutely win. Yes. That's a good one. Well, this was awesome. A lot of great actionable, very actionable things. So thank you. Appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
To everyone out there who's looking for SDRs or someone who is a future would-be SDR, it's an interesting market right now, but I think it's clear that the role is not, it's evolving quickly, but it's definitely not going away.
Thanks, Ernest.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Revenue Makers.
Do you have a revenue project you were asked to execute that had wild success? Share your story with us at sixcents.com/revenue, and we might just ask you to come on the show. And if you don't want to miss the next episode, be sure to follow along on your favorite podcast app.